Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the National Dentex webinar entitled A Locator Life, a Patient's Overdenture Journey. My name is Todd Haddock, and I am the Area Sales Manager for Zest Dental Solutions. I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to be a part of this event, and I'd also like to thank NDX for hosting this webinar. I'd like to thank Mr. Len Connor for taking the time to present to us today. Please note that all attendees are on mute, and if you do have any questions, you're welcome to type questions in throughout the webinar. Most of the questions will be answered at the end. Just a reminder that this is a non-CE webinar as per the invitation that was sent out. Before I introduce Len, I'd like to give a brief synopsis of a locator life concept, what it is, and how it relates to your patients who are looking for cost alternative overdenture therapy, especially now during this COVID-19 pandemic. As you know, when patients are going to be edentulated, they're usually offered two therapies, dental implants or a denture. A lot of times, if a patient cannot afford dental implants, they will be receiving a denture. A locator life offers these patients cost alternative therapies by using their natural teeth and giving them a secure overdenture at a lower cost. This also allows the patient to gradually transition into dental implant therapy in the future. With the COVID-19 pandemic, patients are changing their decision criteria due to economic uncertainty. A locator life will play a huge role in helping patients receive better therapy than just a denture. I'd like to introduce Len. Len is the Director of Clinical Affairs for Zest Dental Solutions. Len is responsible for product and technological support to and from the customers. He oversees training and curriculum development for customers, global sales, distribution partners, and in-house personnel. He also oversees need and development of clinical studies and works with the Zest key opinion leader clinicians. Most recently, Len completed 20 years as the Director of Technical Specialties Group for Zimmer Biomet. With over 45 years of experience and 32 years of them specializing in dental implants, Len has also presented over 1,500 education programs. Len has established a solid following in the dental implant field. Len has also attained accreditation with the National Board of Certified Dental Technicians. He's also a member of the Academy of Osseointegration. He has earned his mastership with the International College of Oral Implantologists, a mastership with the American Academy of Implant Prosthodontics, and he's also a member of the American Dental Implant Association. So Len, thank you very much, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate that. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time to come on with us today for this presentation. And there you go. A little bit about the agenda as we're going to talk about today. You'll kind of see when you look at this slide that it talks specifically about products, but really what we're going to talk about is the benefits and the types of restorations we can do with the products themselves. We'll get some product information. We'll talk about some of the features and benefits of different systems, but the idea overall is to look at the options that we have for patients from partially dentalism through overdentures and then even up to fixed dentures. So we've got a number of different solutions based on what patients are going to need. Okay, so something to look at overall. So problem with patients and dentures is there's a low satisfaction overall with dentures. While you can get a little bit better fit with a maxillary denture because we have got more undercuts to deal with, we also have some suction that can be established in the palate. Mandibular dentures are almost never going to be a good fit. Part of the reason is while we can get suction, et cetera, with the palate and the maxillary, overdenture or denture, right? The only thing that holds a lower denture in place for the most part, especially as patients start to lose some bone, is gravity. So it's going to be a very unsatisfying type of restoration for our patient. even the best denture is still never going to be able to allow the patient to eat food like they used to in the past. So one of the critical questions is, right, how can we help patients accept a better solution when they're already on the pathway to losing their natural teeth? That's what we want to do first. We want to talk to the patients before they become totally edentulous about some options that we can provide to provide them fixed or well-retained restorations from the start. For example, this is some information that we as a company have gathered over the last couple of years because we work with a lot of those large dental service organizations. These numbers, though, are really kind of an eye-opener as to what patients are looking for or what you can expect when you talk about patients' options for implant supported or implant retained types of restorations as well. When you look at these numbers, you can see very low numbers of case acceptance on implants. And part of the reason for that is there's a lot of cost associated with traditional implant therapy. One of the things we can do, though, is by talking to patients before they become edentulous, is get them on that track so that they know what a good retained restoration is, so that when they make that change from partially edentulism to fully edentulate, they already know that they can have a good, solid restoration in place just by taking advantage of some of the opportunities that we have. So some overdenture statistics as well. Time to convert patients is before they need to have full dentures. If we can get them introduced to a good restorative component while they're wearing partial frameworks, we're going to be a lot more successful converting them to implant overdenture retained patients down the line. Okay. One of the things we're also going to see, and we've seen a lot of presentations on webinars over the last couple of weeks, especially, and we'll see probably more coming up in the next few weeks, as clinicians start talking about what life is going to be like post-COVID-19 and some of the situations that the patients are going to take. What are they going to need to do? Right? A lot of patients who are maybe thinking about having fixed restorations before are going to find themselves having to rethink that based on economic security. Were they unemployed? Were they furloughed? Right? Until everybody gets back on their feet, the next year is probably going to be a lot more removable than the fix that everyone thought they were going to have. All right. Some interesting facts. Look at some of these demographics. You can see there's a lot of numbers on here, but the big factor is, right, they're all really low. You look at DSO adoption rate for implant patients, 0.6%, right? 300,000 dentures and only 1,800 in overdentures. That's a huge inconsistency in the type of restorations that we can provide for patients. So the key is we got to get that opened up so the patients are more accepting of these types of restorations. Take that lower cost acceptance, for example, that 33%, right? Would choose a lower cost removable overdenture if it was less expensive. So let's give them some of the solutions first. Then we can talk about cost when they already know, right? For example, what a locator is going to be able to retain and how stable their restoration is going to be. Okay, so these are the components specifically we're going to talk about today and the different types of treatment that they can offer. Our locator root attachment system, which is used, we see it a lot with patients with removable partial frames, and also especially patients who may be in transition from going to edentulism, right? We keep a couple of retained roots, cement the locator attachments in there to establish the stability for their denture. They may be looking to go on to implants later on, but this gives them an idea of what that retention can be like early on. We'll talk about also for narrow and standard diameter ridges for patients looking at overdenture type of appliances. The Zest Locator Overdenture Implant System, right? Started out as a minimally invasive narrow ridge solution, but we've expanded that out because it's been so successful. A lot of clinicians are very excited about having it that they could use in standard ridges as opposed to just narrow ridge solutions, right? The whole thing started off with the industry leading locator attachment itself. We'll talk a little bit about locators, how that fits into the overall treatment, and the different types of scenarios that we can deal with that. We'll talk a little bit about the Locator R-Tx. The R stands for removable. Essentially, Locator R-Tx is Locator the next generation. So we'll talk about why you would use that over the traditional locator. And then finally, we'll spend a couple minutes talking about some options with our Locator F-TX system, the F standing for fix, which allows us an opportunity to talk about doing fixed type restorations, how those hybrid restorations, when we talk about doing all on X or all on 6 or all on 4 or those types of situations where we can now provide patients with fixed solutions, right? But we don't have to do all of the screws, channels, pick up the denture the hard way when we're making adaptations to the patient's denture to make it into a fixed restoration. So we'll end up with that as our final option, right? So the goal is to help your patients achieve what we call a locator life. And that's taking locators while the patient's partially edentulous and then moving them on through that system. We just talked about our components here again. This is really important, right? Because anytime you use a locator abutment, right, they're manufactured by Zest. So the 20 years that locators have been on the market, we've treated over 4 million patients. We make locator abutments for 280 different implant connections. And we have over 100 different implant partners that we make these components for. So whether you buy a locator from Zimmer Biomet or you buy a locator attachment from Nobel or Straumann or Astra, right, we manufacture with our implant manufacturing partners locators for all of those systems. Right. One of the best things about locators, especially in the implant world, is the fact that it doesn't matter what the connection is that the locator attachment connects to, whether it's an external hex, internal trilobe, whatever the case may be. Doesn't matter what the diameter of the implant body is either. Once the abutment is seated on top of that implant body, the connections where the cap snaps into the denture are all the same. So it's all same restorative components. No matter what implant system the patient has, you use the same parts to restore all of them. You use the same drivers to take the abutments off, put them back on, right? They're all universal from the time that interface between the abutment and the implant is established. Okay. Some of the things about the locator attachment itself specifically that makes it so successful. It is the #1 overdenture attachment in the world. A couple of different things that make it that way. First is the pivoting technology that was built into the system itself. The nylon insert that snaps into the abutment also moves within the metal housing that's retained in the denture, so that it helps the patient align it, the denture, when they're seating it, because patients who wear overdenture appliances generally seat their restorations, no matter what you tell them, the same way that patients do who wear removable partial frameworks. They get them close and they bite them down. The fact that the nylon housing moves inside the metal cap allows it to line up on top of the locator attachments a little bit better, so that when the patient does bite down, right, or does snap it down, however they're going to do it, the caps align over the top of the abutment first, so that it seats better, less opportunity for the cap to be distorted or pinched, ground down, or with something like that. So that pivoting technology and that self-aligning design, because it allows it to move, is a big success when it comes to helping the patient get the prosthesis to seat. So it keeps up the retention, right? Because the cap aligns on its own. It also is one of the lowest vertical height overdenture abutments on the market. On average, to do any type of overdenture appliance, you generally need somewhere between 12 and 15 millimeters of interocclusal space from the top of your implant to your opposing dentition. Because locator overdenture components and the housing are so short, you can actually get by with locator attachments with a minimum of 10 millimeters of interocclusal space from the top of your implant to your opposing dentition. Because the functional component portion of the abutment and the housing stacked up is only about 5.5 millimeters tall, right? So you've got the ability to make a really short overdenture, which is great because a lot of these patients who generally aren't wearing their appliances right off the bat end up with a collapsed bite because they haven't had anything to hold their teeth in place, right? So let's start out looking at root attachments first, because it's the start of the locator family, because we take in conjunction, right, using the patient's existing roots. Essentially what we would do in a situation like this, you can see primarily you're going to see it used like on the far left hand side in removable partial frameworks. It's a great retentive component for that, but also again in that transition to a full denture. By taking a patient at this level and doing a traditional root canal and then cementing the root locator attachment into the tooth root to establish the retention into the partial or to the denture, right? Even before the patient is edentulous, we're establishing a good solid fit and solid retention of our removable appliance. So now the patient gets used to what that retention feels like, and then going forward as they become edentulous, right, and transfer to that full denture, they're going to know that they can have something that is going to go ahead and retain the denture and give them a good solid component they're going to be able to eat a lot more with. They're going to be able to feel a lot more comfortable. They don't have to worry about their dentures coming out of their mouth, moving around when they try and talk, etc. So this component right here is really what gets them started in understanding what we can provide them further down the line when they lose the rest of their dentition. Right? Some of the features that it also provides: future revenue stream, in the fact that patients who have this type of treatment done generally are going to have more treatment done when they do become totally edentulous. They're not going to want to have just a traditional denture. They're going to either have our locator overdentures, abutment and implants, or they may have traditional implant therapy with removable appliance as well. They're going to be much less likely to settle for a traditional denture when they already know the benefits of have something retained that allows them to function in a much better situation. Right. So the initial treatment for a patient like this, right, very similar to what you would expect doing a traditional root canal. We go ahead, do the root canal. The biggest difference with this situation when we're using these root attachments is the fact that we're going to decorticate, excuse me, we're going to cut down the top of the tooth so that the root is only going to be sticking up about 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters above the top of the soft tissue, because we don't want the abutment sticking up too high into the denture, because we want to try and keep it as stable as possible. Right? So we'll go ahead and do the traditional root canal. We have a drill that then is going to drill the hole a little bit bigger and parallel in diameter so that we can insert the root abutment itself and you cement it into place. At that point, it's just like using a traditional locator attachment on a traditional implant, because now we've got locators in place. We'll go ahead and pick those up chair side like we normally would with traditional locators. What this does, though, is it gets that patient on the track to dealing with an overdenture that is implant or abutment retained, so that again, further down the line, they're going to be more likely to accept treatment that's going to provide them with a much better appliance. Okay. We have a couple of different versions. We have a straight, we have one that's 10 degrees, and we also have one that's at 20 degrees. The reason for that is we offer all three of those is based on the angulation of the tooth. Right? A lot of times when patients are in this type of situation, they've lost a lot of bone. So, right, no telling exactly what angle the base of that tooth is going to be off. By having a couple different options, it allows us to deal with what the patient has left, and is much less likely for us to have to do major modifications on the tooth based on where the root comes in and out through the apex of the tooth. We also have a couple of different locators that you can use in conjunction with machined or cast to metal bars. Those situations where we have to have a framework or we want to splint all of our implants together, we have locator attachments then that'll fit on top of the bar. You actually we have a drill and a tap that you drill into the bar, tap threads into it, and then the locator screws right down onto the top of it. We also have a cast to version for if you're doing old school casting of a framework, right? We incorporate the cast to version into the wax up, cast that up as well. So we've got a lot of different options just on cases for the most part that are still partially edentulous for the patients. Okay. Here's an example of using the cast to version, right? Just like we would do with a traditional post and core type situation when we need to do a coping and we can't just leave the coronal portion of the tooth exposed. We need to do custom copings. Then you would do basically the same thing. You would treat it just as if we're going to do retained roots, do copings, or we were going to connect them. In the old days, we would have done something like this. We probably would have connected them on the mandible with a bar, right? And then snapped with hater clips over the top. But having the independent flexibility of locator attachments allows for good retention of the restoration, and it also helps with that anterior posterior rock type of situation we can get when we've got a very hinged type of access and the denture can only function in one way. Okay. These are the two parts that you see up at the top is the drill that we would use to prepare the tooth, to cement the locator attachment in, the root locator attachment into the tooth, right? While it looks like it's threaded, those aren't really threads. It's just that they're ridges for cement retention. So you want to make sure that you had space in between when you take the abutment in and out to allow for the cement. What you see on the bottom is the countersink drill that we use so that we can take that flared portion at the base of the abutment, right? So it puts a thicker, stronger connection right at the top of that tooth and abutment junction where you're probably going to get the most amount of lateral forces as the patient functions with the denture. Okay. The root starter kit itself, you can see it doesn't really consist of a whole lot. It's pretty simple. You got one drill that has a drill stop on it. The countersink drill, we have a couple of the different angulations. We also have a parallel post. That's what that little black post in the middle is. And then it comes with a number of the traditional processing packs that you would to go ahead and process the locator root attachments that are in the top of the case. Pretty simple situation. The only real thing that you've got to have to make sure that you can use this type of a therapy is that the root has to be a minimum of 4 millimeters in diameter at the top to accommodate the locator attachment itself, and so that the tooth has got enough structure to it, right, so that lateral forces won't cause the tooth root itself to fracture. Once you've got that 4 millimeters, like I said, we'll do a traditional root canal. Then we'll use the drill with the drill stop. It'll drill just straight down the root canal so that we get it seated. We'll provide a nice parallel post hole. We'll use our countersink drill as you see on the bottom left hand. Then we'll seat our abutment using the parallel post that snaps down on the top. We'll also use that post when we're going to cement the abutment into the tooth as well, because it allows you to make sure that you're in the right position, and it gives you something to hold on to while we're cementing the post down into the tooth. Okay. This is what I was just talking about. One of the other things, in addition to locator attachments, a lot of people don't know about Zest is we also have a very full line of consumable materials that are used in conjunction with implants and traditional dental procedures. For example, we make the cement that you see right here that can be used to cement your root locator into the tooth. Right, so it's a traditional. It's a universal. It's a resin cement. The only key factor when it comes to cementing components down into the tooth root is if you're not using, for example, if you're not using our cement, you do want to make sure that you're using a cement that does not expand, right? Because otherwise what happens is you can actually fracture the root by using an expanding cement after you put the post in. So make sure if you're not using the semi-Z type of cement, resin cement from us, that you use a non-expanding cement to cement your post in. Right. Couple of examples, taking advantages of using the patient's existing roots in conjunction with removable partial frameworks. When I used to do a lot of overdenture programs for Zimmer Biomet, this was one of the things that clinicians really liked the most, because there was always someone in the room who would say like, wow, I never thought of that. I never thought of using locators or the existing root or even of an implant to retain a removable partial frame. But a couple cases like this gives you a really good idea of what you can do, and you can be sure that once the patient gets used to the type of retention that this type of appliance can get because of the locator attachment itself, they're going to be very interested in hearing what you have to say as they make that transition from partially dentulous to fully dentulous, and now looking at the situation of having to go to a full denture, but they can go to a full denture that's got good solid retention. Okay. As you can see, this is just another case, another case example using the root locators. Great opportunity, again, as you can see, to get the patient into something that's going to be well retained, right, and very well supported. Whether you're using that full denture like on the maxillary, or even if we were doing the locator attachments on the mandible, right? If we had a couple of locators in that anterior portion of the saddle on the mandible, right, that'd be a lot of retention back there. And again, as patients become more edentulous, as they lose more teeth, we can replace those either in situations where we can use the root locator, or again, maybe a traditional implant therapy, or even the narrow ridge or standard ridge locator implants that we have available next. A good example, you can see this is where it's really great with the locator attachments, because one of the features of locators is the fact that you can have an off-axis path of insertion for your components up to 40 degrees. And still, because of the fact that the housings will align themselves before the denture seats, you get that self-aligning aspect of it, you can still get a path of insertion between the components, even at such an off-axis as this particular case that we're looking at right here. We can still snap down over the top of those and get those to seat. Okay. Here's a good dual arch case from Dr. Saab using the roots. You can actually see the old ZAG, which was the precursor to locator attachments back in the, those have been out since the 80s. Same basic idea. Weren't quite as flexible though. They had a little like nylon button that snapped down into that, but they wore out a lot faster than locators do just by nature of how the components interacted. Okay, so here you can see I'm taking advantage of using the locator root attachments on those anterior teeth. Those are the old ZAG components in the posterior. And then on the mandible, you can see we've got 4 locators on this particular arch. There's going to be a lot of retention. This patient is going to have a very stable appliance, both on the maxillary case and also on the mandibular, right? There's a lot of retention on there. That guy's going to have the opportunity to eat a lot of different things. He's not going to have to worry about his teeth moving at all. There's a lot of stability and a lot of functionality in those particular dentures now, okay? Maintenance protocol. This is something that a lot of guys ask about, right? Maintenance recalls should be at least every 6 months, right? Because we want to do prophylaxis and scaling. The roots are going to be, the tooth is going to be exposed. We're going to want to make sure that the patient comes in so we can make sure that we're not developing any caries around the tooth. We want to make sure we've got good retention on the caps. Generally, locator caps are probably going to be changed out once, maybe twice a year, depending on how much the patient takes the appliance on and off, and also what the angulation offset may be. For example, if a patient has 40 degrees off axis path of insertion, right, the caps are going to probably wear out a lot faster than if you got very parallel implants that you're dealing with, right? So you want to make sure that you're keeping track of that, right? Again, 6 months is really good because you also want to make sure that the denture continues to be seated, right, and that the patient doesn't need a reline. Once the denture doesn't seat right onto the soft tissue, that's when you start getting a lot of excessive wear around your abutments and around your nylon housings. So you want to make sure that you're also always checking the seating of your appliance, right? Because these are tissue supported appliances. The abutments are retaining the denture via the caps, but they're not supporting it. The soft tissue supports these denture appliances, right? So the number one question when we talk about using locator root attachments is what happens when the root fails? Because eventually, right, any tooth that you do a root canal to has the ability to go any day. Well, what that does is, so when the root fails, then what we do is we extract the tooth. And in situations like this, where you can see we actually had to do some grafting on it as well because the hole was so big, allowed that to heal, place a traditional implant or one of our Locator Overdenture implants. And then even though we still have a tooth on the other side, all we're going to do is address that one at a time. We'll use the tooth supported appliance on one side, and we'll go ahead and do the implant supported on the other side. And then at that point, when we have to change the other one out, say, for example, the tooth root fails, or the patient wants to go with something fixed and we place a couple of more implants for a fixed appliance, right? We can take advantage of using the patient's existing restoration and retrofit that into the appliance itself. We're going to have to pick up the housings again in the denture, but you're not going to be so far off that you're going to have to redo the appliance itself at that point, right? It's also very important when we do go ahead and pick these up that you want to make sure that you've got all the undercuts blocked out underneath your abutments so that we don't get too much acrylic in there and then the acrylic locks the denture in place. The potential is a lot higher. The higher your abutment sits up into the patient's mouth, the more potential for locking that denture in when you go to pick up your housing. So you want to make sure, here we're using our silicone sleeves. In that situation with that one on the right, you probably going to want to put another sleeve on there so it blocks out that undercut underneath. Right, the one on the left, that looks good, right? No undercuts there. The one on the right, not so good. We're going to want to go ahead and put another sleeve on there, or we could use some of our chairside blockout material as well. You just inject it underneath the little silicone sleeve that you see right there. It sets up, and then once you've got your components picked up, it just pops off of the abutment itself. So it's a good way to keep acrylic or whatever your pickup material may be from getting underneath. Okay. So here's that patient's denture after the tooth was extracted. We're going to go ahead, and you can see this thing is in pretty bad shape. So we're going to use this as the provisional appliance while the patient's getting a new denture done. But essentially, we're going to go ahead and trephine out the existing housing. What we're doing right there is just showing where the abutment's going to be on the denture, so we can go ahead and hollow that out. Now we'll go ahead and pick up the new housings in the denture. Want to make sure it's seated down all the way. Always leave your pickup components in the metal housings until the denture is done. That way you don't have to worry about chewing up the housing or anything while you're finishing the integral version of the denture. Once it's all finished and polished on the underside, then pop out your processing caps and then seat your final components and on top of that, and we're good to go. Okay. Once the root fails, though, we have an option for, like I said before, both narrow and standard ridge implants. These implants are designed specifically for locator attachments, right? So when you buy the Locator Overdenture implant, it comes with the implant body. It comes with the locator attachment itself, and it also comes ready for you to go ahead and process it into your dentures as well, right? We have them in 3 different diameters. We have a 2.4 and a 2.9 for narrow ridge situations. And we also have a 3.4 diameter abutment that you can use in traditional standard ridge situations. The advantage is it comes with a locator already. You seat the implant, you put your locator attachment on it. In situations where you have good primary stability, you can do an immediate load case. In situations where you don't have good primary stability, meaning 25 to 30 Newton centimeters of reverse torque, as you seat the implant into the body of the bone. If you don't, we also have little healing caps that you can buy and then screw down on top of your implant body, so that it's just like doing a single stage implant placement. And the implant's placed, you have a little healing collar sticking up through the top of your tissue. Once the implants are integrated, you can unscrew the healing collar and then seat the appropriate height locator attachment. The implants come packaged either with a 2.5 millimeter tall locator or a 4 millimeter tall locator. However, we have every range in between up to 6 millimeters, so that depending on the amount of soft tissue you've got, you can get the locator height that you need to get through the soft tissue and have you put in the right situation for the minimal amount of abutment exposure necessary, right? So you don't have to stick it up in the patient's mouth too far. So the idea behind it was to take the old one-piece ball attachment implants, add a locator concept to it, and essentially the first choice was, okay, let's do this for narrow ridge implants. We've had the narrow ridge implants on the market for quite a while. Very successful, good retention, good solid stability. We expanded with the new 3.4 standard ridge just this last year, and it makes a really good addition, because now it's a situation where we had a lot of clinicians using this in narrow ridge situations, but they were having to use a different implant. Even though they were doing locator retained overdentures, they would have to use a different implant system in those standard ridge situations. By expanding this into that 3.4 diameter, it allows us to handle both situations, and the clinician uses the same small surgical kit to place the implants, whether it's 2.4, 2.9, or 3.4. And you get the same advantages of traditional locators in the fact that your inner occlusal height needed to your opposing dentition is so much lower than any of the other overdenture components that are on the market. Okay, we just kind of talked about this a little bit. 2.4, 2.9, 3.4 standard ridge. And again, the all-in-one packaging provides you basically the locator overdenture implant for a lot of some of the aftermarket partners and other situations where you're basically getting your implant and abutment, and you're getting your implant for free because the price is about the same as the traditional retail on locator attachments. Okay, some of the features that come specifically with this that allow us to treat patients in these situations: the very low vertical profile is a really key factor. We wanted to make sure, since the locator abutments were known for being the lowest overdenture components on the market, we wanted to make sure that when we built it into an implant, right, that we were able to keep that really short vertical height. The fact that we have implants for both standard and narrow ridges using the same 3 or 4 drills max. The implants themselves are very self-tapping, which is really great because it means that the implant bone preparation becomes very minimal because of the design of the apex of the implant. They self-tap and provide a lot of primary stability, specifically in those edentulous patients where, right, we have a very hard cortical plate, but a lot of times once we get down lower into the softer bone, right, you don't have quite as much stability. That's where the self-tapping of it really comes into play, because you do an undersized hole right? And then you get a lot more thread engagement into your cancellous bone, okay? Surface treatment, essentially, it's very similar to a lot of the implant surfaces that are on the market, whether a lot of you guys are familiar with the RBM or resorbable blast medium, but it's the same thing, whether it's RBM, some people call it MTX, some people call it SBM. Essentially, it's a blasted resorbable media that really allows us to control the micro size of the pitting to keep it in that optimal 1 to 2 millimeter pitting size. Oh, excuse me, 1 to 2 micron pit size. Okay, it's a cost-effective option. Like I said, we have a number of different heights based on your soft tissue needs, right? And then we talked about that aggressive thread design already as well for your primary stability. Surgical kit is pretty small. Doesn't take a whole lot when you've got self-tapping, narrow and standard ridge implant options. But essentially, we've got a couple of different drills based on the diameter. We have some direction indicators, right, to help you keep parallel when placing the implants. The drivers to seat the implant, and then we also have the traditional locator driver to seat the abutment on top of the implant once you get it seated. Okay. Packaging is pretty dang nice because everything that you need comes with it. Right, so you get the implant body, you get the abutment, and then you get the processing components necessary as well for the locator attachments that you're going to restore. The healing caps that you see on the far left-hand side down at the bottom, those are optional. My recommendation is for anybody who's ever wanted to start placing these implants that you get a handful of the different sizes available. That way, if you get in there and the patient can't have an immediate loading done of the denture, then all you do is you put your healing caps on it, and you don't have to worry about placing the locator attachment anyway, blocking out around the denture, etc. Okay, great example, right? You really wouldn't be able to tell whether this was traditional implant therapy or our locator overdenture implant because the idea is the same. Right, the biggest advantage, as we just saw, some of the advantages of the locator implant is the fact that it's very cost effective and it has features and benefits that were designed specifically to take advantage of locator attachments. Right, but providing this type of retention for a patient is what's going to really help you talk to them down the line about having some additional implant therapy done to provide support and retention for whatever their final appliance is going to be. Right. This is what everyone thinks of when you think of a traditional locator case, right? 2 implants in the maxilla, excuse me, 2 implants in the mandible, 4 implants in the maxilla. It would be the same thing when we're talking about the locator overdenture attachments. Now, if you're talking about placing the narrow ridge implants, though, the 2.4, the 2.9, you should probably think of like 1.5 times. So rather than putting just 2 in the mandible, you're probably going to want to put 3 because you've got much less surface area for bone retention to your implants. So you want to get a little bit more support for the denture. In the maxilla, especially on this narrower ridge implants, you probably want to have 5 implants in there, not just 4. The traditional with the 3.4 or traditional standard ridge implants, 2 implants in the mandible, 4 implants in the maxilla. 4 implants are going to allow you to cut the palate out. But if you're doing the narrow ridge implants and you want to cut the palate out of a denture in the maxilla, you should probably have 5 or 6 implants up there to provide good support because now those implants are going to be what's providing all of the support for your appliance as well. Okay, so locator attachments, right? We talked about this right up at the front. Over 4 million patients have been treated with locator implants since we've been on the market. 280 connections and over 100 implant partners that we manufacture locator attachments for. Primary configuration with these components were for removable partial frameworks in conjunction with roots, then transferring over to the implant side when we started making locator abutments that would fit on implants, and then also the locator overdenture implant that has the locator abutment with it as well. The treatment planning is going to be similar no matter what. This could be a tooth, this could be a locator overdenture implant, or this could be a traditional implant with a locator abutment on top of it as well. It's all going to be dependent on how you need to manage the patient. Okay. Another traditional removable partial frame. Personally, I'm really high on the idea of using locator attachments for removable partial frameworks, because when I started in the laboratory a long time ago, when I was in the lab, my first job in the lab was making removable frameworks. And anybody who's delivered removable frameworks to patients knows, right, that framework never fits better than when it comes from off the model the last time, right, from the lab. Once it goes into the mouth, everything starts to change, right? These appliances provide good, stable retention and fit for the patients to hold these appliances in. They can also do a lot for aesthetics as well, because you guys know looks like we'd have to be putting, right, our clasps on those anterior teeth, and you can tell by the shape of those teeth that there's really not much you're going to be able to put on there that's going to be retentive, right? And because it's anterior now, it's also not going to be any type of aesthetic situation either. So better to use the locator attachment than putting like an I-bar or a roach clasp onto that lateral tooth. Right. Great case, using 3 locator overdenture implants, evenly moved around the arch. Because the framework was still going to be thin because the patient had quite the collapsed bite, we went ahead and did a metal substructure as well that we processed the denture over. However, you can see we've got plenty of room to go ahead and pick up our housings, but that's going to be a very stable appliance as well, and good retention all the way around the arch. Okay. We've got them, the implants seated. We're going to go ahead and pick them up. Right. Essentially, what we're doing is showing where we're going to need to hollow out the housing. This makes sure that we can know that we've got enough space, because we want to make sure we get enough space for the pickup material to hold them in place as well. We also have our chairside prep kit. These burrs are made specifically for retrofitting dentures and partials for locator attachments. The burr that you see sticking up on the left-hand side is the undercut burr. And what that does is it actually builds an undercut into the denture, right? So that it locks in the material, because not all of the pickup materials that are on the market will actually bond to the acrylic, right? So you want to make sure you build in some mechanical retention as well. And that's what that does. It allows you to put a little shelf so that it locks in your bonding material as well. Okay, our chairside material that we used for the pickup, we also have a reline material as well. Is probably the #1 pickup material used on the market these days as well. It doesn't need a varnish. You don't have to light cure it. And it's really easy to clean up too, which is one of the things that, being a lab technician who did a lot of partials and dentures, that I really like, because it pops off pretty easy and it finishes down. It doesn't finish down all gummy. It finishes down like acrylic. Okay, so we'll go ahead, inject the material into the denture. We'll pick up the housings, finish and polish the underside of it so it's all the way we want it to be. Take out the processing caps, the black processing caps, and we'll snap in our final retentive components. Right. Okay. That is a very solid, stable appliance. The fact that you can see the housing and the bottom of that metal framework shows you how thin that appliance was, which is one of the reasons we put the metal framework in there to start with, because we were concerned about it being too thin and potentially fracturing. Okay. One of the other things that we have available is, while locators will handle an off-axis path of insertion up to 40 degrees, sometime in these situations where we're doing something, while it's going to be a removable appliance, your implants may still be very off-axis. And what we have available is the multi-unit abutment locator, right? That allows you to use, for example, the Nobel multi-unit abutment or any of the Nobel multi-unit abutment clones. And then you can use those angled abutments to straighten your implants back up right? So you have a more parallel path of insertion for your denture, because even though we would be able to get a denture to seat, there's going to be less wear and tear on the abutments and retentive components the more parallel that they are. Right. One of the things that's also new that we just launched the first of this year is we also have scan bodies now available for Locator. So if you're doing printed or milled dentures, essentially all you do is you'll seat the locators in the patient's mouth, you'll snap this cap down on top of it, and you'll do your intraoral scan. That way what it does is it puts the undercut into the 3D case planning, so that when you mill or print the denture, it already has the optimal size and space built into the denture, so that when all you need to do now is when the patient comes in, you'll put your pickup material into the denture and see that you don't have to do any of that drilling or retrofitting of the denture, right? Because it's already got it milled in. Okay. The next component we're going to talk about is our Locator R-Tx abutment. The R stands for removable, and essentially what the R-Tx abutment is Locator the next generation. Right? Locator attachment's been on the market almost 20 years now. We've had a lot of great suggestions from clinicians, from lab technicians, even some from patients about things that would make it a little bit better, or what they would like to see. But rather than making all those changes one at a time, we kind of did it all at once, so that we have a system that takes advantage of those changes, and we don't have different versions of Locator attachments out there all through the market. Some of the biggest differences between the two: why would you use a Locator as opposed to the new Locator R-Tx, or vice versa? Well, for parallel cases, or implants that are within, we say parallel, but implants that are within 40 degrees of off axis, traditional locators work great. One of the biggest advantages with the Locator R-Tx is the fact that you can actually be 60 degrees off axis between implants. And because of the additional rotational movement of the inserts and the housings, can still get self-alignment and your denture to seat. So that's a big difference, because 60 degrees or 30 degrees implant to implant, that's awful lot. And in those types of situations where patients have had a lot of bone loss, or they have bony defects in situations in the way the implants are not at angles that we ideally would like, right? We still can take advantage of using those, and we don't have to use some type of straightening abutment or angled abutment to get a path of insertion that's going to allow the denture to seat. You look at the components though, the retentive inserts look basically the same, right? Those are our traditionals on the far left for fairly parallel implants. Our extended range basically takes the button out of the middle, which allows you to that extra 20 degrees of flexation. And then the R-Tx, which allows 60 degrees, basically pretty much the same thing as far as the retentive components and the light, medium, and heavy retention, but also the processing caps are the same as well. The biggest difference in the retention factor is we don't use the buttons on the inside for the R-Tx abutment, but we also have a double outside retention. So it doesn't just snap over the top, but it snaps over twice. You can see that there's a little undercut on the top of it, and then there's also that little roll underneath that the caps snap down over the top of, right? So essentially, you're still getting double retention, but we're getting double retention with the ability to have that very off-axis seating of your appliance as well. One of the things that we don't have on this particular slide presentation, but I want to make sure I talk about as well, is because the R-Tx was designed for more off-axis tendencies between our two implants. The housings move in the inserts move in the housings a lot more, right? As you can see on the slide. If you've got very parallel implants though, and you want to take advantage of using the R-Tx because they last longer, smoother, less plaque buildup because the surface itself is a lot harder and a lot smoother. If you've got very parallel implants and you use the traditional housing that you see right here, the patient's going to have the sensation that the denture floats because it's not going to come detached, but because the inserts flex more, you're going to be able to feel a little bit of movement there. One of the things that we just came out with earlier this year is what we call limited movement inserts, or restricted movement inserts. And what they do is the diameter is just a little bit bigger on the outside diameter of the insert, so they don't flex within the housing as much. So for patients who have parallel implants and you want to take advantage of some of the other opportunities with the R-Tx, right, they won't flex as much, so the patient won't feel that movement when the denture is seated. Okay. Some of the biggest differences here, probably one of the biggest, is the fact that the coating itself makes the implant abutment 32% harder. That 32% harder does a couple of things. It means it takes longer for the abutment to wear and need to be changed out, but it also makes it so that the coating itself is harder, but it also makes it a lot slicker, right? So the surface is a lot smoother. The smoothness part makes your retentive components last longer because they don't abrade on the metal of like the traditional titanium nitride coating like traditional locators have, which means you're not going to have to change out your inserts as fast. And because they're harder, the abutments are going to last longer as well, so you're going to get longer use out of your components. Right? We kind of talked about this and the fact that the key feature is the fact that the inserts rotate more in the metal housings, and that's what allows us to get those very far off axis situations. And then again, the limited motion or limited range inserts, the outside diameter of the nylon cap is just a little bit wider, and in those situations are for more parallel implants where you don't need as much flexibility. Right. What's really nice with these components as well is the fact that very similar to the Locator Overdenture implant, when you buy the abutment, you get the housing and all of the retentive components that you need to process it, just like what you see on the left-hand side. Additionally, the new Locator R-Tx, you don't have to use the old Locator seating tool anymore. You just use your standard 050 hex driver, or 050 or 1.25, depending on what your company calls it. You can't use the old 048. You have to use the 050 or 1.25 hex, right? And that's will be kind of a it'll be a universal driver, so you can actually just use your torque wrench to seat it with. Okay. And again, we kind of looked at these already, right? 0, low, medium, high, just like we have with our traditional locator and extended range components, right? Here's a good case showing that off-axis ability of these cases right here. You can see on the upper right-hand side, those implants are pretty far off axis from each other, right? Even between the different axes there. So we'll go ahead and take advantage of those. Still be able to get a good path of insertion. You can see we're going to put a metal horseshoe on here to provide some good stability and strength for the denture as well, and still be able to leave that open palate. Oops, sorry about that. We're going to get good retention on this case, and the patient's going to be able to, as a matter of fact, not only do we have good retention on it, but we've also got good cross arch stability on here, to the point that there was so much retention on this case that they only used 3 implants as opposed to the 4, and actually didn't use the one that's in the posterior. Okay. The last thing we're going to talk about is our Locator F-TX. The F stands for fixed, and essentially it works kind of like a locator in the fact that we've got an abutment that seats into the implant body, but it looks like a little ball. And then we have, rather than a nylon insert that snaps into the metal housing, we have a ball that screws into the metal housing, and then when you seat the denture, it snaps into that abutment and is not removable by the patient. So it's a fixed hybrid solution, very similar to doing, like I said, like an all-on-4, all-on-6, or whatever the case may be. The advantages is that the abutment can rotate, or the top retentive component can rotate 360 degrees, so it's easy to line up. It has a 20-degree angle connection, so 40 degrees off axis all the way. The biggest advantage is that you don't have to pick up sleeves and throughs through your appliance, right? It's just going to be just like picking up locator attachments, processing the housings in the underside of the denture just like you traditionally would, but rather than snapping out the black processing cap, you're going to unscrew the black processing ball and then screw in your final retentive component, right? This also is a great abutment to use as a rescue component. We used to have the old saying, right? All on 4, none on 3. Because if you were to ever lose an implant in a situation like that, you couldn't use that patient's appliance, right? Whatever you would do, because when you place another implant, right, it's not like you could get it close enough and it's going to line up perfectly for a screw retained appliance. Well, what the Locator F-TX allows you to do is you use your other 3, for example, implants, place your implant within the structure of the framework itself still, and then you pick up the housing in your denture. And because you can adjust the rotation and the angulation of the housing itself as you pick it up in the denture, right, you can use the patient's existing restoration, screw retain the other 3, and then use this as your fixed option. Okay. This is what it looks like, very similar to the R-Tx and to the Locator Overdenture implant. It comes with all the components that you need to process. And again, this is not a patient removable appliance. Once that snaps down using the insertion tool, the only way to get it off is using the removal tool that you get from Zest as well, right? It's not going to pop off from patients themselves. This is essentially how it works. Looks very similar, right, to picking up locator attachments. We even use the same little silicone blockout rings. We'll seat the abutments, snap our blockout ring on there, snap the housings down, parallel everything back up. We'll pick them up in the denture, process the underside, make it more of a hybrid type of a situation. Remove our processing components, screw in our final components. The denture snaps into place and is not removable until the clinician removes it when the patient comes in for their next appointment. Okay. We also have the ability to use this in conjunction with traditional hybrid cases. For example, we can do tilted implant procedures in the posterior. In a case like this, use the angle correcting abutments. For example, in this case, we do the 17-degree angled abutments in the posterior, use our F-TX abutments in the anterior. So the only screws in this type of appliance are going to be those 2 screws in the posterior. You're not going to have to worry about any of the aesthetic issues or pickup issues of trying to pick up sleeves and screws in the anterior. So still a lot faster processing your appliance than if we were doing a traditional case. This is what this looks like. You can see, fortunately, that it's very narrow on the anterior, so we get a lot better aesthetics based on the fact that the components are in the underside of the denture component, right? And we're only screw retaining in the posterior on this particular case. All right. I think. All right. My summary slide. And we are a couple minutes over, so I'm going to wrap this up really quick, and then Todd's going to finish up for us. So essentially, the whole idea of what we just talked about for the last hour and a couple of minutes is to make sure that we start talking with our patients while they're partially edentulous, right? Patients who are wearing removable frameworks, are they going to start with removable frameworks, right? And help them through that transition from partially edentulous to edentulous, and then the rest of the way through, whether they start with a removable partial frame, then go to a full denture, locator retained, locator supported, or at some point, right, over the course of a time, they can go ahead, add a couple more implants over time, and then go from a removable appliance to a fixed appliance. All right. So
Lynn,
that's
I just wanted to thank you for for everything with this presentation. It was amazing. And in conclusion, I just wanted to reiterate the options that are available for the patients through a Locator Life and their overdenture journey. This concept has worked really well for dentists and patients pre-COVID, and now it has become even more advantageous post-COVID. For the dentists and for the patients. I know we are kind of running late on time. We do have some questions, but we're going to actually answer those questions via email and share them with everybody so they can see the questions that were being asked. But I want to thank you, Len, for taking the time to present this concept to us, and I wanted to thank NDX for hosting this webinar. And thank you very much. If you go to zestdent.com, you'll be able to see some additional education webinars that have taken place that you can get on demand, as well as ones that are being done for the remainder of this month, as well as with National Dentex on their website with their webinar and education series as well. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time and attention today, and stay safe and healthy out there. Thank you.